Hello everyone. In this lesson we're going to learn how to resize an image on the server side. Let's jump right into the action. And actually, before we get to resizing an image, let's take care of a few miscellaneous details. Let me explain. So when you visit your profile and then you click Manage Avatar, we would want this URL and also the URL that actually receives the submitted post request. We would want those to be protected so that only logged in, authenticated users can access those routes. So I would just go in and search for my web.php file. And on those two manage avatar routes at the end before the semicolon, just say, dash greater than middleware. And the name of our middleware, we named one, or we created one, a custom one named must be logged in. So I would just copy that and use that exact same code for this route as well. Cool, so both the get and post request for that. Now, in this window I'm logged in, I can still visit that. But if I try to visit that URL in Firefox, so as soon as I push enter, perfect. It doesn't let me visit it. You must be logged in. Beautiful. Also, before we add the ability to resize the image on the server side, let's first add a bit of basic validation to this manage avatar form. Let me show you what I have in mind. So go into your user controller file, and here we have our store avatar function. Let's actually give ourselves a completely clean slate in the body of this function. So let's imagine we were submitting a regular form, like when you log in or register or create a blog post. So we already know what to do. You validate the incoming request. So let's say, $request, look inside it for the validate method. Give that an array, and let's just say that the avatar property, associative array symbol, that it should be required, and then the pipe symbol. So you create this symbol by holding shift, and it's the key above the enter key or to the right of the curly bracket key. So it's required, and it must be an image. So for example, it can't be like a PDF or a TXT file, right? It would need to be a JPEG or a PNG, so on and so forth. And let's also say that it can have a max size and it's measured in kilobytes. So why don't we just put it to, you could set it to anything you want, 3,000 would be 3 megabytes, or you could put it to 6,000. Just to prove a point so we can actually see this validation message, I'm gonna put it to 3,000. Cool, so now if any of these problems exist, we won't move forward. You'll see those validation messages. If there are no problems, then we would just, look inside the request, call the file method, and the file was named avatar, and then we could just, store that in public/avatars. Let's save that and give it a try. So let's actually fail a few times on purpose. So for example, if I upload a file that's too large, so this file is over, I said 3,000 kilobytes. If I try to submit that, perfect. We see the message, the avatar must not be greater than 3,000 kilobytes. Or if I try to submit the form with no file, really quick, just so we can see the server-side validation, you could go into your avatar form.blade.php and just remove this required attribute on the input. So if I save that, I refresh, I try to submit the form, beautiful. We see server-side, right? The avatar field is required. Finally, if I choose, let me go into my downloads folder, if I choose a PDF, something that's not an image, and I try to upload it, beautiful. The avatar must be an image. But if I successfully choose a file that meets all those requirements, and I click save, cool. Well, we forgot to return a string of text or render a template, but if I go into my folder, and I go into public, and then I click on storage, or you could just go directly into storage, app, public, avatars, there's that file. Cool. Now that we've taken care of those few random details, let's actually learn how to resize an image. The idea here is that when someone visits your website and they want to upload an image, it's probably a really large original resolution file. And we only need to store, a photo that's maybe about this big. There's no sense in storing a 3 megabyte huge file if we only need to, store one that's about this big and 20 kilobytes. Now, believe it or not, but Laravel doesn't actually have the ability to resize an image, natively in the framework. But that's not a big deal because luckily we have Composer, which makes it really easy to pull in a battle-tested rock solid package, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. Someone has already created an amazing, perfect package for this scenario, right? Resizing an image or manipulating images server side. So do this with me. All we need to do, open up your command line, and we're going to say composer require, and the name of the package is intervention slash, and that's a / image. If you need to pause the video to type this in, that's cool, but let's go ahead and run that command. So that should take just a few seconds. And now watch how easy it is to leverage that package. We just go into our user controller, and instead of just immediately saving the file as it comes in, let's first modify it and then store that data somewhere. In other words, we're not going to be calling a store method directly on something that the user sent to us. So let's entirely remove this line, and instead, let's say we're going to use uppercase image. That's the third-party intervention image package that we just downloaded. And we're going to use a static method that it has of make, so semicolon. Now, in order to actually use this, just right-click on the uppercase image and choose import class. There's a few different options. The one that we want is this one. So it's intervention image facades image. So I'm going to click on that one. You'll know that it's correct if you now have a line like this up at the top, right? That says use intervention image facades image. Cool. Now, what make is going to do is it's not going to create a file on our hard drive. It's going to return to us the actual, raw data that would be saved in a file on your computer, the data itself. So here's what I'm going to do. At the start of this line, we don't want whatever it returns to just float in outer space. We want to hold on to it. So at the start of this line, let's create a variable. You could name it anything. The name doesn't matter, but just so it makes sense, why don't we name it, IMG, or even like IMG data equals whatever that's going to give us. Cool. Now in these parentheses, you give it the original full-size image or whatever the user uploaded that you want to modify. So let's make an image out of, that would just be $request, look inside that, call the file method. Our file is avatar. Cool, so we're making an image out of that, and now after these two closing parentheses, but before the semicolon, we can tack on a method of fit. Let's just change it to a square, resize it, that's 120 pixels tall and 120 pixels wide. And then let's also tack on and call encode, and let's just force it to be of the JPEG encoding or format, right? So even if someone uploads a GIF or a PNG, we want to save it as a JPEG. Cool. Now this didn't actually create a file anywhere on our hard drive though. This just is going to give us the raw data that should be saved somewhere. So that's where we're going to use this variable that we named image data. So on the next line of code, let's use the Laravel storage facade or storage class, and it has a method, a static method of put. So semicolon. Now we give put two things, so A comma B. The first thing we give it is the path. So that's the directory and the file name of where you would want to save it. So for example, let's say like quotes, public slash, example folder slash, and then imagine we wanted the file to be named like cool.jpg. Cool. Now the second argument, this is the actual data itself that should make up the file. So that would just be, instead of B, $whatever we named it, image data. Now before we save this, we do need to make sure that we can actually access the storage facade or class. So you just right click on uppercase storage, click import class. Beautiful, that automatically adds it up here for us. Let's give this a save and test it out. So if I refresh this form and I choose an image, remember we added that rule that I think it needs to be under 3,000 kilobytes. So this image is 1.5 megabytes, perfect. If I choose that and click save, well, we forgot to return a string of text. We can fix that in just a moment, but if you go into your application storage folder and then app and then public, beautiful. Remember we just said example folder, and there we chose a name of cool.jpg. And if you actually open this up in your browser, sweet, it's only 120 pixels tall by 120 pixels wide. And I believe it's only a few kilobytes. Yeah, it's only 5 kilobytes. This is awesome. Except we wouldn't want to actually name it cool.jpg. We would want a sort of randomly generated unique name, and we also don't want to save it in this awkward example folder. So I'm going to delete example folder. And back in VS Code, let's think about where we would actually want to save it. So I would want to generate sort of a unique file name that no one else is going to have. So first of all, we would want it to be in public / avatars. But then we wouldn't want cool.jpg. So let's give ourselves a clean slate. In storage, app, public, avatars. Let's delete these files that we already have in there. Cool. So the idea is anytime you upload a file, let's start with like the ID of the user account, and then I'm going to add on a bit of randomly generated, just to ensure that the file name is unique, that there's not already a file with that name. So here's what I would do. Let's start by remembering the current user. So I'm just making this up. This could have been anything, but let's just create this variable and call auth and then call the user function. Cool. So we're going to use this for several reasons. Number one, I want to find the ID of the user, but number two, eventually we're going to want to update their row in the database, right? If you look at MySQL and you look at your users table, right? The end game goal here is we want to update their avatar column to actually point towards the relevant image. So long story short, we're going to use this user variable for several things. But let's imagine that we want to generate sort of a seemingly random string of text. So again, I'm going to create a variable. You could name it anything, pizza, unicorn, but let's name it like $file name equals. And then I'm just going to take the user, look inside there for the ID, and then I'm going to concatenate on. There's no rules to this. I'm just making this up. Maybe like a dash. And then I'm also going to concatenate on. And then in PHP, there's a function called unique ID. Well, unique is spelled incorrectly, right? Like shortened, but unique ID. Call that function. And then finally, let's concatenate on just a string of text of JPEG. Semicolon. Cool. So it's going to be like whatever their ID is. So it might be like 3 dash and then sort of a randomly generated string of text. .jpg. So then that's what we would want to use down here. So in the avatars folder, we don't want to name it cool.jpg. So I would just close out that set of quotes. And then before the comma, I would just concatenate on, $file name. Cool. Let's save this and give it a try. So if I go back and resubmit that form, let me choose maybe this image of a dog and I click save. And then I go back into my storage folder. Perfect. There it is. Right? So my Brad user ID has a 1, but it's 1 dash and then a unique string of text .jpg. Beautiful. You could try it again really quick. Let me go upload one more image. So maybe this dog. Go ahead and click save. Beautiful. Right? It's just a tiny file that's only 5 kilobytes. Now remember, our goal in this lesson was just to learn how to resize an image. So we've accomplished that goal. Now in our next lesson, we're going to tie things together. We're going to store this file name in our database, right? In the avatar column. And then we're also going to connect the dots so that we would actually pull in the image for the current user in session up here. And when you view a blog post by a certain author and on their profile, we'll get all of that connected and set up. And we're also going to learn how to set up a fallback image so that if you haven't uploaded an image yet, instead of a cat, we show maybe like a pencil or a generic image. Let's keep our momentum rolling, and I will see you then.